The locksmith was already changing the lock on the front door when a Daisy came up the path with 2 bags of groceries and her youngest asleep against her shoulder. It was 6:52 in the evening, the second Tuesday of November, and the man did not look at her. He kept turning the small silver tool in his hand, and the deadbolt clicked into its new home with a sound she would remember for years. There was an envelope taped to the wood above the handle. Her name was on it in handwriting she knew. She did not put the bags down. She did not wake the child. She read the letter standing up, and when she finished, she folded it back into its envelope along the same creases, slowly, the way you fold something you intend to keep. She did not know that the man who wrote it would one day stand on that same path with nothing in his hands, and that she would not recognize his face. Adeze Okafor was 31 years old. She weighed 109 pounds, 11 pounds less than she had weighed the spring before, because for 7 months she had been giving her dinner to whichever of the 3 children looked hungriest at the table. And most nights, all 3 of them looked hungry. She had 3 of them. Chidi was 8 and carried himself like a man who had appointed himself the guardian of his sisters. Nkechi was 5 and asked questions that had no answers. The baby, Amma, was 11 months old and did not yet know that her father had left, which Adis thought, on the worst nights, was the only mercy in the whole arrangement. She wore a gray cardigan she had bought from a charity shop on Sandgate Road for £1.50, and she had mended the left cuff twice with thread that almost matched. The cardigan was clean. She washed it by hand in the bathroom sink every few days and laid it flat on a towel to dry, because the dryer cost money she counted in coins. Worn was not the same as dirty. Her grandmother had taught her that on a stool in a kitchen in Enugu 30 years ago. And Adeze had built her whole life on the distinction. You could be poor. You could not be careless about it. Poverty was a circumstance. Carelessness was a decision. She kept one thing from that kitchen. It was a small enamel cup, white with a faded blue rim, that her grandmother had used to measure flour, to drink her morning water, to scoop rice from the sack in the corner. The cup had a chip on the lip where it had once fallen, and her grandmother had refused to throw it out. A thing that has served you faithfully, the old woman said. You do not discard because it is wounded. Adeze kept the cup on the windowsill above the sink. The children were not allowed to use it. They knew, without being told why, that it mattered. What Adeze wanted was small. She wanted to keep the 3 of them in the same school so they would not have to make new friends in the middle of a bad year. She wanted to make rent on the flat on Brunswick Street, which came to £840 on the 1st of every month, and which she had not missed once, not even the month Obinna left. She wanted, more than anything she would have admitted aloud, for her children to grow up not knowing how close to the edge they had lived, so that the fear she carried would not become a thing they inherited. That was all. She was not trying to become anything. She was trying to hold a small, ordinary life together with both hands while a wind tried to take it. The night the locks changed, she did not bang on the door. She did not call Obinna and scream, though she had his new number and her thumb hovered over it for a long moment in the cold. She walked the 3 of them to her cousin Blessing's flat 4 streets over, carried the baby the whole way because the pushchair was locked inside the old house, and when Blessing opened the door, Adeze said only, "We need a few nights." She did not explain. She put the children to bed on the sofa and the floor. And then she sat at the kitchen table and made a list of every job she could do and every person who owed her a favor. And the list of jobs was longer than the list of favors, which was how she knew she would have to work. She found work cleaning. There was an agency on the high street called Brightwell Domestic Services, And the woman who ran the desk was named Pauline. And Pauline looked at Adaise's hands before she looked at her face. This is a thing that happens to women who clean. People read your hands the way other people read a resume. Pauline saw hands that had never stopped working. And she nodded once. And she put Adaise on the rota for houses in the good part of town, the houses up on the hill with the long gravel drives, and the gates that opened when you spoke your name into a box. The system that had locked her out was not made of villains. This is the thing the children would never understand, and the thing Adaise understood completely. Obinna's solicitor was a polite man named Mr. Achebe, who answered her letters within 3 working days and addressed her as Mrs. Okafor, and explained, in sentences that were never once unkind, that because the tenancy and the deposit had been in Obinna's name, and because Obinna had given proper notice to the landlord, there was nothing unlawful in what had been done. The landlord was not cruel. He was a man with a mortgage who had received notice from his tenant and acted on it. The school was not cruel. The school sent a letter expressing sympathy and another letter, 2 weeks later, about the unpaid trip fee. Everyone was following a rule. Every rule, lined up beside the next rule, formed a wall, and Adaise stood on the wrong side of it with 3 children and an enamel cup, and not one person who built the wall would ever have called themselves a builder of walls. There was a neighbor on Brunswick Street, an older woman named Mrs. Owusu Boteng, who had watched Adaise hang washing on the shared line for 2 years, who saw the locksmith's van that evening and who stood at her window with the curtain held back in one hand. She did not come out. Adaise saw her there, a pale face behind the glass, and the face withdrew, and the curtain fell, and that was the part Adaise thought about later more than the locks. Not the cruelty of strangers, the stillness of someone who knew her, who had borrowed her sugar, who chose the warm side of the window. She cleaned houses for 9 months. She was good at it, but more than that she was reliable, which in the houses on the hill was rarer and worth more. She learned the rhythms of other people's lives. She learned which families ate together and which ones left plates in 3 different rooms. She learned that wealth did not make people happy, and that this observation, however true, paid none of her bills, so she stopped making it. She worked through a cold that lasted 3 weeks. She worked the morning after she sat up all night with Amma's fever. And Pauline, who was not a soft woman, told her to go home, and Adaise said, "If I go home, I don't get paid for the home I was meant to clean." And Pauline did not argue, because Pauline had been 31 once with no one behind her either. The ticking clock in those months was the rent. The flat blessing had helped her find a smaller place on Judah Street, came to $790 a month, and the agency took its cut of her wages before she ever saw them, and the maths only worked if she took every shift offered and never, not once, got sick in a way that stopped her. By the end of the 9th month, she was 41 pounds short for November. 41 pounds. Not a fortune. Not even a real number to the people whose houses she cleaned. But she had counted it 4 times at the kitchen table, and 41 pounds was the distance between her children, sleeping in their beds, and her children sleeping on Blessing's floor again. And she sat with that number for a long time. It was on a Thursday, cleaning a house on Cantonment's Rise that she had never cleaned before, that the first thing happened that she could not explain. The house belonged to a man she never met. The agency only said he traveled and wanted the place kept ready. In the study, dusting the shelves, she found the books arranged not by author or by size, but by something stranger, by feeling. The sad books together, and the books that made you brave together, and a whole low shelf of books about fathers. And she stood looking at that shelf for a moment too long, because she had arranged her own grandmother's few books exactly that way as a girl, by how they made her feel. And no one had ever taught her to do it, and she had never met another soul who did the same. She finished the shelf. She told herself it meant nothing. She locked the gate behind her and spoke her name into the box and walked down the hill to collect her children. Then the agency offered her that house as a regular every Thursday, and the wages were better than the others. And for 3 weeks she cleaned the house of the man who organized his books by feeling and never once saw him. And the 41-pound gap closed, and her children slept in their beds. And she let herself believe, carefully, the way she let herself believe anything, that the worst of it was behind her. That belief lasted until the Thursday Pauline called her into the agency office and closed the door. There was a man there, not the homeowner, a solicitor, a different one, older than Mr. Achebe, with a soft voice and a folder. He asked her to sit down. He asked if her name was Adaeze Okafor, formerly of Brunswick Street, formerly married to Obinna Okafor. She said yes to all of it, and her hands went cold because solicitors who find you do not, in her experience, bring good news. And she thought, with a calm that surprised her, they have found a way to take the children too. If you've ever sat across from someone holding a folder with your whole life inside it and waited to learn whether the news would break you, subscribe and stay with me. Because what was in that folder was not what Adaeze thought. And the next few minutes turned the entire story around. The solicitor said the house on Cantonment's Rise was being sold. The owner had passed. He had no wife, no children that anyone could find. He had left instructions, years old, that the woman who kept his house was to be informed personally and offered first refusal on its contents before any sale, and a small sum besides. And the solicitor named the sum, and it was more than Adaeze had earned in the 9 months entire. She did not understand. She had cleaned the house 3 times. She had never met the man. Why would a stranger leave anything to the woman who dusted his shelves 3 times? The answer did not come from the solicitor. It came, 2 days later, from an old woman at the corner stall near Judas Street, where Adaeze bought bread. A woman named Constance, who had sold bread on that corner for 30 years and who, it turned out, had known everyone on the hill and everyone below it for longer than that. Constance heard the name of the dead man and set down her knife. "Kolade," she said, "you cleaned Kolade's house." And then Constance told her a thing that Mr. Achebe's polite letters had never contained. A thing Obinna had buried so deep that even his own solicitor had not known it. Kolade had been Obinna's older brother. The brother Obinna never spoke of. The brother who had paid for Obinna's schooling and his first flat and had cut him off years ago over a thing Obinna had done to someone. And Constance looked at Adaeze when she said it, over the way Obinna had treated a woman. Kolade had asked once for the woman's name. Obinna had refused to give it. And so Kolade had spent his last years searching for her the only way a private man knew how, through the small companies and agencies that touched the houses on the hill, leaving instructions in case she ever passed through one of his doors. What Constance said next changed the direction of everything that followed. She had passed through his door. The agency had sent her up the hill by chance to a house owned by a man she never met. And the man had been gone before she ever arrived, and the books arranged by feeling had been his, and the low shelf of books about fathers had been his, and he had been looking for her, his brother's abandoned wife, the whole time he was dying, and they had missed each other by the width of a season. She sat down on the stool by Constance's stall, and she did not cry. She held the bread in her lap. She thought about a man she would now never meet, who had arranged his sorrow on a shelf the same way she had arranged hers as a girl. And she understood that grief, like dignity, was a thing some families simply knew how to do quietly, and that she had married into one of them without ever being let inside. The reckoning, when it came, did not come the way the films would have it. There was no scene. The solicitor handled the contents and the small sum, and Adaz used it to clear the rent ahead a full year and to buy, for the first time in her life, a thing she did not need. A proper bookshelf, real wood, for the flat on Judah Street. And she arranged her grandmother's few books on it by feeling the sad ones together. And she put the enamel cup with the chipped blue rim on the top shelf where the children could see it but not reach it. Obinna came back 14 months after that. She had heard the way you hear things, that his new arrangement had not held, that the woman had left, that the money Kolaid once provided had long since run dry, and the brother who might have provided more was in the ground. He came up the path on Judah Street on a Saturday in the late afternoon. Adayeze was in the front room with Amma, who could walk now and talk now and did not know him at all. There was a knock. She opened the door. She did not recognize him. This is the part that was true and not a figure of speech. For one full second, holding her daughter on her hip, she looked at the man on her step and her mind returned nothing. No name, no history. Only a thin man, older than he should have been, with a coat too light for the weather and an expression she had seen on other men who came to doors asking for things. Then the second passed, and the features assembled into a face she had once loved and once feared, and had finally, somewhere in the 9 months of cleaning houses on the hill, stopped thinking about altogether. He said her name. He had come, he began, because he had heard about Kolad and about what Kolad had left. And he wondered. And here his voice did the thing she remembered, the reaching thing, whether they might talk about the children, about being a family, about starting again. She looked at him for a moment. Behind her, Chidi appeared in the hallway, 9 years old now, and stood with his hand on the door frame the way he had stood guard over his sister since he was 8, and said nothing. Adayeze did not raise her voice. She did not list the 9 months. She did not tell him about the 41 pounds, or the curtain that fell at the window, or the dinners she had not eaten. She said, no. One word. And then, because she was not cruel, only finished, she said, go well, Obinna. And she closed the door, not hard, just closed it, and turned the lock she owned in the home she paid for, and went back to her daughter. Obinna thought he had left Adayze with nothing. He had taken the flat, the deposit, the furniture, his own name off the lease, and walked into a life he believed would be larger without her in it. But the truth is that he could not take the things that mattered, because the things that mattered were never his to hold. He left her with her grandmother's lesson about worn and dirty. He left her with a pair of hands that had never learned to stop. He left her with 3 children who would grow up knowing exactly what their mother was made of, because she had been unable, in the end, to hide it from them the way she'd hoped. And that turned out to be a gift and not a failure. You can take a person's house. You can change the locks at 6:52 on a Tuesday and tape a letter to the door. You can remove your name from every paper that connects your life to theirs. But you cannot reach inside their hands and remove what those hands already know how to do. And you cannot unteach a person their own worth. And the things you are most certain you have taken from someone are often the very things they were carrying all along, waiting for the day they would need them. And the afternoon he stood on her step, asking to come back inside. She was already standing in the middle of a life he had no part in building. A small front room, a wooden shelf with books arranged by feeling, an enamel cup with a chipped blue rim on the highest shelf catching the last of the light. and a little girl on her hip who would never have to learn how close to the edge they had once lived. If a man left you with 3 children and changed the locks while you were carrying groceries, and then came back years later, smaller, asking to be let into the life you built without him, would you open the door? And if you wouldn't, could you do what Adis did and close it without raising your voice, and feel nothing on the other side but the weight of your own child and the quiet of a house that was finally, completely yours? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until the day they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.